My name is Attracta Mooney. I'm the investment correspondent at the Financial Times, and we're here today to discuss whether it is right and proper to benefit from the wages of sin. So we're talking about all the fun stuff, booze, tobacco, guns, gambling, and we've got quite a disparate views on our panel, I think, so it should be an interesting session. If you could, please submit questions via the app, or at the end of our session we'll do 5 minutes taking questions from everyone. And also please do tweet about the session using the hashtag PLSA Invest. So today I'm joined by a foursome, a good foursome. So we've got beside me Helena Viñes Fiestas, Head of Sustainability Research at BNP Paribas Asset Management. Beside Rachel Melsom, Director of UK and Europe Tobacco-Free Portfolios. Beside Rachel is Christopher Snowdon, Head of Lifestyle Economics and the Institute of Economic Affairs. And then finally, Mark Fawcett, Chief Investment Officer at Nest. So we're going to be started today by Helena, who is going to talk us through BNP Paribas' broad views on sin stocks.
Thank you. I'm just going to stand up just for this bit. Good morning to everyone. I figured out that this early in the morning, talking about gambling or alcohol was probably not the best thing, not even in Scotland. So I chose a different type of sin stock, cereals. Yes, you heard it correctly, cereals. So I just have a question for all of you. How many of you had cereals for breakfast this morning? Or put it differently, how many of you have breakfast twice or 3 times per week? Please show us your hands. Okay, almost everyone. So I'm terribly sorry, but you are all sinners. Yes, you are. We are sinners because cereals basically contain really high levels of sugar. We all have heard it over the last years how hurtful and damaging sugar is. So a breakfast, one portion of breakfast contains about, the average is about 3 teaspoons of sugar, which is your daily recommended intake. So really, really bad. As we also have heard, sugar is associated with cardiovascular problems, with many cancers, type 2 diabetes, and a whole range of awful diseases. So I want to check how knowledgeable you are about your cereals, because I heard it is actually the most popular breakfast in the UK. So we have 6 cereals. Taking into account what I just said about sugar, but also thinking that excess of salt and saturated fats are no good for us either, could you please think about which one of these cereal packages is the healthiest and which one is the unhealthiest? And I'm going to name going one after the other one, and please, raise your hand if you think that the one I mentioned is the healthiest, okay? Ready? Okay, how many people think it is Special K? Okay. A few. Cheerios. 1 person. 2, 3. Okay, 3. Getting excited. Honey Smacks. Okay, absolutely no one. Granola. Okay, quite a lot of people. Cornflakes. Oh, there we go. And Frosted Flakes. Okay, 1 person as well. And the winner is, as we just had the Oscars, Cheerios. That is the healthiest one. And the unhealthiest, no surprise, Honey Smacks, but then is followed by granola. So let's go back to the cereals, yeah? What does Cheerios have differently from the other cereals? Can anyone guess? Any taker? Well, the answer is the company behind it, Nestle, because a few years ago, Nestle decided that it was going to reformulate all its products, particularly those who target children, and it's been reducing constantly, year after year, the levels of sugar, salt, and saturated fats. So what we did a few years ago, 2 years ago actually, with the sell side of Societe Generale is we look at all the product portfolio of the food companies, we look at their exposure to salt, saturated fats, and sugar, and then we look how they what their strategy on nutrition was, how they managed from reformulation to innovation, also what were their practices and performance in terms of labeling and marketing. And we rated them. Oh, sorry. And we rated them. And this, in a nutshell, it's an example of how we look at all the different, whether they are sin stocks or environmental, social, and governance issues. We take the issue, we analyze it, then we look how the different companies are actually managing the risk, but also how they might benefit from the opportunities that brings. Interesting enough, today, 2 years later, cereals, the cereal market has actually dropped, and only those who have lower levels of sugar have, remain. I don't need to tell you that health and nutrition is one of the biggest drivers on the food sector. And what we do is we give all this information to the financial analysts and portfolio managers, so for them to include it in the fundamental research, because we actually believe that the consideration of these factors enhances the quality of the investment analysis, but also, the quality of the subsequent investment decisions. And we do that not only for equities, but also for our fixed income, and now we're starting to do it for alternative assets, namely loans and infrastructure and real estate debt. Now, what we also do is we have set up minimum standards across the board and specific standards for certain activities that are thought about being sensitive or maybe slightly sinful. But the reason behind that decision is to manage the potential risk, a potential financial risk, that might be entailed by the wrong managing of a company of that issue. What we also do is we engage with companies in these issues, and actually we're quite proactive with our voting rights. So for instance, in the case that I show you, we are part of, since inception, the Access to Nutrition Index, which is a group of experts on nutrition that they rank companies, the top companies, on how they manage nutrition, but on their efforts to improve access to food and nutrition as well. And we engage with the companies, on that topic. Now, there are 3 exceptions to what I just said. Number 1, asbestos, which is a very clear cut. It is illegal in more than 60 countries in the world, including the European Union and the UK. No brainer. Controversial weapons, because either they are illegal or because the damage is so disproportionate from a humanitarian point of view. What we're talking about is chemical and biological weapons, anti-personnel mines, and cluster munitions. It's also worth remembering that 8 countries within the EU, including Ireland, actually ban financing those activities. And finally, tobacco, which I think Rachel is going to talk more about it. But why tobacco? Because there is, number 1, there's no responsible consumption of tobacco as it is for sugar. No matter how how awful sugar, how damaging sugar is, if you stick to those 3 teaspoons per day, so that is 1 portion of cereal, and you don't take any more sugar during the day, then it's fine. And secondly, because there is no point, absolutely no point, in engaging with tobacco companies, unless the purpose of your engagement is to improve practices on their lobbying, activities, or for instance on supply chains, problems such as child labor. Because are you going to engage the company? You're going to go to a company and say, please, what we would like you is to seize, your core business. So obviously, not much of sense there. And I think I'm going to leave it here for the time being, and look forward to the debate. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Rachel, do you want to talk us through why we shouldn't be investing in tobacco? Do this with
some slides, which is pretty rapid fire. So apologise for the swiftness. It's a big subject to try and cover in about 8 minutes. I am the director for tobacco-free portfolios, also a practicing physician on the south coast in the UK in Worthing. I want to just put this into some sort of historical context. This gentleman is Alton Osner. He was a med student in 1919, was called to theatre to see a patient who had lung cancer and was told this was a condition he may never see again. It was that rare. Fast forward to 1936, he saw his second case of lung cancer, and in the 6 months thereafter, another 8 cases. The red line is the age-adjusted cancer death rates in the US for men, and it's in direct correlation to the number of men smoking. The number of deaths caused, if we think back, so 1900, it was so rare he may never see it again, pretty much no deaths from tobacco. By the end of the 20th century, we'd hit 100 million deaths, and our forecast for the end of the 21st century is 1 billion. We are currently running at 7 million deaths a year, and we're on track for 8 million a year by 2030. That's all very well, a number of statistics. What are we actually going to do about it? Well, at tobacco-free portfolios, we believe that the best way to look at something like tobacco is to put it into a framework that makes sense from an investment perspective. And to Helena's earlier point, one of the things about tobacco when it comes amongst a number of investments is tobacco is unique. And it's unique for 3 key reasons. The first one is that there is no safe level of consumption. 0 is the only safe level, a number of cigarettes that a human being can consume. So this isn't at parties, this isn't at weekends, this isn't just on holiday, it's absolutely 0. The second question that we need to answer when we're looking at investments is this problem of a scale? That means that we need to do something about it. There are multiple problems in the world and many things we need to look at. But why is it that tobacco is different? Well, there is a UN treaty on tobacco. The problem is that big that we have 181 parties signed up to a UN treaty, that's just under 90% of the global population, wanting to do something about what we in the health sector call the tobacco epidemic. That's 1 billion forecast deaths by the end of this century. And Helena has also touched on this point, engagement. Engagement with this industry is futile. It's futile because the only acceptable outcome from a health perspective is to cease production of the primary product. And the industry is not going to engage on that basis. And if you want to look at it from the other side, we normally engage with companies because we want to improve the product, we want more users, we want greater distribution, and larger profits. I can't say that any of those things are true for tobacco. On the second point within that framework, which is the UN treaty, I just want to highlight the number of UN initiatives that are aligned with the top one, which is the UN Tobacco Treaty, Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. We've got the Sustainable Development Goals. 14 of these 17 goals are negatively impacted if we continue to invest in tobacco. So when we're talking about trying to achieve them, we also need to look at what we need to stop investing in to stop us achieving them. Human rights. The Danish Institute for Human Rights did a project for Philip Morris International about a year ago. They pulled out early, along with the statement that tobacco is fundamentally in contravention of the human right to health, and that the only way tobacco companies can adhere to the UN guiding principles on business and human rights is to cease the manufacture and marketing of tobacco. It was an absolute. There's no halfway house here. UN Global Compact, as of October 2017, has delisted tobacco companies. They are no longer permitted to be members of Global Compact. So if we're using that as a framework to assess the way in which we invest, that clearly states that tobacco is not acceptable. I'm going to skip over the others, we're fairly familiar with those. Future risks, and I know Mark is going to touch on this as well. The risks associated with continuing to invest in tobacco are 3 key ones in our view. The first is regulatory risk. The regulatory risk, because we have the UN treaty, we have 181 countries committed to rolling out the regulations that are in that. We actually like to call this regulatory certainty. We know that this is happening. The second one is litigation risk. The business model is being questioned increasingly by countries across the globe. We have an industry that has externalized the costs to society, currently running at approximately $1 trillion on a global annual basis, and internalized the profits. That's under question. The global community is now saying that's not acceptable anymore. and the supply chain risk, which links into reputational risk. The ILO published recently that the majority, we've known for a long time, the majority of tobacco farming is done by children. Their words were actually that child labour is rampant in the tobacco industry. A little example of regulatory risk: last summer, the FDA announced that they were going to look at regulating the amount of nicotine that's permitted in cigarettes. That's what happened to the share prices of British American Tobacco, Philip Morris and Altria, and they still have not regained the total amount that they lost. Reputational risk. In August last year, the UK Serious Fraud Office opened a formal probe into British American Tobacco for bribery and corruption in East Africa, preventing ministers from implementing the UN treaty. I'm just going to briefly, if I've still got time, address one key question that I'm always asked about investment. It's like, this is a legal product. Why would we not invest in a legal product? 2 points I want to make on that. One is this product has been around a long time, and it's sort of maintained its presence through its longevity. If we were to bring to market today a product that killed 2 out of 3 of its users, was addictive, and was marketed to children and externalised all its costs to society, I doubt that that would be given a licence. The second point I want to make is this is a product that's marketed to children. Children are the key individuals who start to smoke. Pretty much most adults don't start. This isn't something that they take up later in life. The reason I've got this chart up is Australia has the lowest smoking rate for boys aged 13 to 15 in the world, and the greatest amount of tobacco regulation. If you look at the other countries next to those, Indonesia and Timor-East, 38% to 41%. The numbers speak for themselves. These are boys aged 13 to 15 years. This is not legal for these children to be smoking. And in Pakistan, 40% of boys start smoking before they are 10 years old. And this is the reality of what these individuals look like. So when we're looking at 7 million deaths a year, in order to maintain that revenue stream, we need 7 million replacement smokers. This is the face of the replacement smokers. However, there is an upside. The global finance sector is looking at this and is increasingly acting on this knowledge and accepting that this breadth of impact on society is no longer acceptable. BNP Paribas, as you've heard from Helena, no longer in tobacco. Robeco announced yesterday that they will no longer be investing in tobacco in their mainstream funds, and you're undoubtedly familiar with ABP, who announced in January that they will no longer be investing in tobacco and will be out of tobacco by the end of this year. There are a raft of other examples, which I won't bore you with every single one, but if anybody wants to discuss them, I'm around later. But I'm going to leave you with the question that if we want to benefit from what we're terming the wages of sin, we also need to consider this cost, and we need to consider how, per SDG number 17, which is partnerships, we can get government, the health sector, and the finance sector working together to address this problem. Thank you.
Christopher, do you want to talk us through, I guess, your view on whether it is actually up to pension funds to kind of police the ethics of sin stocks?
Sure, yes, thank you. I first became aware of this issue 2 or 3 years ago when I was asked to go on the radio to debate whether a local authority should be divesting itself of its tobacco stock, and there was a councillor on the other side of the argument who felt very strongly that it should do. But I was unable to really ascertain why he believed it was going to help in any way. And I went online. There's a TED talk, which I think is by one of Rachel's colleagues, goes on for 20 minutes. That didn't really explain it to me. I've looked at the website, which again reiterates what you've just heard, that smoking is very bad and all this kind of stuff. But I haven't heard how actually divesting shares is actually going to stop a single young person from taking up smoking. And I don't believe there is a plausible scenario in which that would happen, and the same would equally apply to gambling or sugar or guns or anything else that you choose to look at, anything that's allegedly a sinful product and we shouldn't be endorsing. Now, obviously what you choose to invest in for yourself or for your clients is entirely up to you. And I do get that if you really dislike a particular industry, you don't want to have stock in it and feel that you have to cheer it on. If you don't like Manchester United, you might not want to put a bet on them winning a game because you don't want to feel that you're conflicted by it. Deep down you want them to lose, but your financial interest is in having them win. I understand that. But Equally, you shouldn't think that just because you've got a bet on Manchester United, they are more likely to win. I think that's the comparison. I don't think that there is any scenario, even if there was a huge sell-off of shares, that would make any meaningful difference to the demand for the product and the fundamentals of the company. And that's the point, that really about the fundamentals of the company. They don't change. And they're actually pretty strong for most of these industries. I'm not here to give you share tips, and it's not my area anyway. I gather from people who know about these things that tobacco shares are a pretty solid investment and will be in the short and medium term. So I think in order to discuss this sensibly, you need to make an assumption. Economists always like to make bold assumptions, but it does help for the thought experiment. If you just assume that tobacco shares or gun shares or fossil fuel shares are going to be amongst the best performing stocks of the next 10, 20 years, let's assume that. It has been the case in the past, or to put it another way, in the year 2000, would you have recommended or would you have bought shares in British American Tobacco, which I think was the single best performing share of the noughties. Now, if you wouldn't have done, I think we then need to ask the question why, because you are putting yourself out of money, or indeed your clients out of money. I don't mind what private investors do, but I think when we're dealing with local authorities, dealing with taxpayers' money, I think this is a very expensive way to virtue signal for certain local authorities and government to say, well, we don't approve of this industry and this industry, so we're not going to invest our money in it. If that leads to taxpayers having to make up the difference, which it will do if you end up buying an inferior stock, I think that is actually unethical itself. I think it's highly unethical for a bunch of grandstanding local councillors to decide they're going to sacrifice a wedge of money which taxpayers must then make up for no benefit. And again, this is my point. I'm waiting to hear somebody explain to me how even a mass sell-off of shares is going to affect the demand for the product, affect the consumption of the product, affect the production of the product. I see no way in which it could happen, except I guess the one exception would be if these were startup companies and you're literally investing in the company who are then going to use that money and start building factories. But that's not the case with fossil fuels or sugar or tobacco or alcohol or gambling or any of these very well-established companies where all the shares are second-hand. You're just buying from a secondary investor, and if you sell them, they will be snapped up because the fundamentals of the industry fundamentally don't change. And that really is all I have to say about it, because I see nothing else with which to engage. It is, I think, gesturing. It might get a few headlines. Plausibly, perhaps in some way, this divestment movement might make governments see industries as somehow pariahs. But divesting from tobacco is not going to stop a single person. Smoking, divesting from alcohol is not going to have any effect whatsoever, even on the margins of how many people get alcohol-related diseases. Likewise, fossil fuels and climate change, gun shares and number of mass shootings. Unfortunately, none of this can make any difference. And if you're dealing with other people's money, fine. If you want to have an ethical portfolio, absolutely put that out there. It's the same as offering fair trade coffee and all these other things to make people feel better about themselves when they buy them. But it is actually not going to make any positive difference on the problem that has been identified.
Thanks, Chris.
So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So, despite the title of this session, I'm not going to talk about ethics or morality. I'm going to talk about investment risk. And for our members, who will be with us many for several decades, we need to manage their long-term risks. And some of these sin stocks potentially have some idiosyncratic risks, and we need to think about how we're going to manage those. So I will, in line with a theme here, focus on tobacco, because that's where we're actually doing some research. And as Chris mentioned, tobacco companies have done extremely well. So the bottom two lines are the US and UK stock markets, and the top two lines are US and UK tobacco stocks. So you can see between the start of 1900, when no one had heard of lung cancer and smoking was considered a healthy activity, to 2017, these stocks outperformed substantially. But as we all know, investment isn't about what's happened in the past, it's about what's going to happen in the future. And the reason we started looking at tobacco was we're concerned about regulatory risk and the impact that might have on our portfolios. So in recent years, we've seen a widespread ban on tobacco advertising, bans on smoking in public, and more recently, bans on having branded packaging. So there's clearly a regulatory direction taking place, and that's the risk that we're worried about. Because this clamping down potentially on the tobacco industry will impact potentially its future revenues. And in particular, as Rachel already mentioned, the tobacco industry externalizes the costs of the impact of smoking. And with government budgets tight on healthcare around the world, we think that externalization is potentially at risk, and tobacco companies are going to have to start actually paying for more of the healthcare costs than they currently are. And that number, I mean, it's hard to estimate. WHO have estimated that the impact of tobacco is about $1 trillion. That's not all healthcare, but we're certainly in the tens of billions, possibly the hundreds of billions of potential liability here. So we've done some work looking at what's happened more recently with tobacco stocks, and Chris said, people he knows think these are great investments. Well, actually, in the last 10 years, so the orange bar is the FTSE developed index, world index, and the yellow line is FTSE developed ex-tobacco. And in the last 10 years, they've basically pretty well done the same. There's been no significant outperformance of tobacco stocks. And our concern is that regulatory clampdown that's beginning to happen is starting to impact on share prices, and Rachel actually gave a specific example of when it did impact with the nicotine control. So we've done some work with FTSE Russell about, well, how could we replicate a portfolio from a factor perspective to get the same characteristics of the all world, but excluding tobacco, and you can actually construct such a portfolio. So the grey bar shows you the performance of such a portfolio, which is ex-tobacco, but basically has the same factor bets, the same style characteristics as a portfolio that includes tobacco. So this is something we're looking at. We're thinking about the impact, the long-term impact and investment risk for our members. And I just want to draw an analogy for what we're doing in tobacco at the moment and what we've done in the past. So last year, we launched a climate aware fund, equity fund, with our equity fund manager, which basically overweights renewables, underweights heavy carbon emitters, and actually excludes coal, pure coal companies. And the reasons for doing that is because we are also concerned about carbon risk, and we can see again the direction of regulation. So there's a direct analogy between regulation in carbon, and everyone now accepts, well, excluding the US president, everyone now accepts that man-made climate change is happening, and that something needs to be done about it. And we think that managing that risk in the portfolio is important, and we think managing the risks of other sectors may well be important. Tobacco is something we're focusing on at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, so really interesting views. So maybe just to start us off, picking up on a point Chris made, where he said maybe potentially it's unethical not to invest in some of these stocks because there are potential returns from them. Maybe Mark, we'll start with you. What is your view? Is it ethical to invest in sin stocks and benefit from them, or do you think it's actually unethical?
So I guess the initial response to that question is, whose ethics? So we have over 6 million members. So even if we could survey all our members on what their ethics were, there's no way we'd get a consensus on that, whether it's ethical to invest in tobacco or unethical. So you basically need some framework to decide how you're going to invest the money responsibly. So an example for us was cluster munitions and landmines. So we took guidance, the framework we use is UK and international law. It's illegal to make these weapons in the UK and across most of the world. Guidance from the Law Commission, they mentioned specifically cluster munitions and anti-personnel landmines. And we looked also at the financial impact of excluding those, and there was no financial detriment. So for us, that was a decision that we weighed up on behalf of our members.
Okay, Rachel, what's your view?
I agree with Mark. I think ethics is something that is individual to each person. I think the broad movement within global investment is to review what we're doing and to work out whether or not that is investment that is appropriate for future generations as much as it is for current. When we look at things like cluster munitions, there is no place for them in terms of the level of harm they deliver. And I do think that tobacco is a case that stands alongside things like cluster munitions, because there is absolutely no societal benefit from it. There's no individual benefit, and there's actually societal detriment. So when it comes to ethics, whether or not an individual as an adult carries on smoking, I think that has to be individual choice at that age, but it is tobacco is very addictive. It's incredibly difficult to give up. As a doctor, I know that. And frankly, as an individual who used to smoke, I know that. It is very, very hard, and children are the ones that are now taking up this habit, and it's the children, the future generations, those for whom we are ostensibly going to be providing, that we need to look at. So the ethics of it, I think most people, every meeting I've been in, every boardroom, if I've said, do you have children, would you like those children to smoke? The answer has universally been no.
That's an interesting point of view, but it is talking about the societal impact. But what about for the actual pensioners in a pension fund? Lots of the tobacco companies are good dividend payers. They generate significant
Mark's
income.
Indicated that those dividends are not necessarily, I think they can be, the income from tobacco can be replicated with other stocks. I think when you weigh up the income versus the absolute cost, if you can match that income elsewhere without that cost, it raises the question, why would you not do that?
What's your view, Helena? How can you pick and choose where to get your income from?
I honestly believe it is not about ethics, it is about risk management, and it's about a long-term view. I think at the heart of the problem, what we're discussing is the endless question around fiduciary duties, yes? I think that in the past it was believed and cited to be fiduciary duties to be a key barrier to look at sustainability, to include sustainability considerations. I think the debate has moved tremendously, and all the new regulatory signs are moving towards that direction, from the new EU Pension Funds Directive, the EU Shareholders Directive, and the debate now at the Commission, which is precisely about clarifying investors' duties. And what they want to, include in our regulations is to say the actual duty is to look after the long-term best interest of the ultimate beneficiaries. So if we look at the ultimate, long-term beneficiaries, there is our role is to really take all ESG risk into consideration, and as I proved, look at which companies, pick and choose those companies that they are managing better, and we believe they will be the ones that perform better. And we have plenty of examples where we have done so. And if I may ask if I can get up my slide on pharmaceuticals, just to move a little bit away, a lot of people, I've been following the pharma industry for a long time, and I remember when we work on access to medicines, You think? Yeah, perfect. On access to medicines, everyone was saying access to medicine in developing countries, it is so far away from the materiality of pharma companies, there's no way, that could have an impact. Well, we believe otherwise, because it is precisely in developing countries where a bulk of the profit is now, coming. So what we've done is we have tracked the performance, shareholder performance of those pharma companies that perform better on the access to medicines and those who don't. This takes into account 20 companies, pharmaceutical companies, and looks from 2004 up to 2016. And the top rated companies perform far better, as you can see, than the other ones. We do believe, and there are plenty of studies, University of Oxford just came out, analyzed 190 studies that actually say 80% of them prove that in the long run, good sustainability credentials, translate in better performance. And we can go back to the special case of tobacco if you want, but I think there's a lot having been said.
Okay. Chris, what about this argument that, pension funds have a fiduciary duty to consider the ethical impact or the risks that come with these stocks?
Well, they do, as with any other stock. But this is a moral question, and I don't think you can sidestep the ethical question by just saying, oh, we don't think tobacco stocks are going to do that well in the future. That may be true. I have no idea how tobacco stocks are going to do in the future, or arms or guns or alcohol or sugar or anything else. But you can only test the moral implications by assuming that they're going to do very well. And it's not a ridiculous assumption given how many investors do invest in these kind of things. A few years ago, there was I think it was Panorama on the BBC, did some expose about comic relief investing in BAE systems and in alcohol companies and I think tobacco companies. And I then looked at the BBC pension, which sure enough includes all of these companies and more. So yeah, they are very much a part of people's portfolios because they actually are pretty good. The fundamentals are actually very sound. But be that as it may, you have to ask yourself the question, if I know for sure that these are going to outperform your average stocks, they're going to outperform the rest of the stock market, would I invest in it? And presumably the answer from at least half the panel is no, I wouldn't. I would be happy to sacrifice that money because I want to be ethical.
Can I come back from that one? I think that the past performance, cannot be a good indicator of future performance. And it's very interesting because before coming here, I rang up a few, sell-side analysts, really fully informed that follow the tobacco industry. And I said, okay, is it really, is this sector still the golden child of the investor community? And they said, well, really interesting, in the past, you're absolutely right. High margins and stable margins, but now it is at a crossroads. And what we do know is their financials are no longer predictable, actually quite unpredictable. And there are two key reasons for that. And this year has been a very good proof because despite the increase on organic sales, there has been a decrease on the margins. And there are two main reasons. One, it was very well pointed out, regulation, can I also get up the slide on regulation on the stock? Because the US FDA announced in July that its policy looking forward on tobacco was actually to reduce, and you can help me on this one, the nicotine levels to non-addictive, yeah? Mm-hmm. Next day, and this is actually from the FT, this is Altria, all the stocks that are listed in the US just plummet 10 to 15%. This is Altria, and do we have the
Zappa?
The Zappa? Yes, and this is for BAT. The other reason why we are very skeptical about the future performance is disruptive technologies, and it's very much interlinked with the regulatory pressures. Companies are trying to circumvent, and trying to respond to the health concerns and this regulation that's coming. So they are bringing to the market new products. We all heard about heat not burn and e-cigarettes, yeah? Well, maybe, but the reality is that today they have not put on the table enough scientific evidence to show that they actually are harmless. And until that scientific evidence is not on the table, we will not move our position.
Okay, but Rachel pointed out that we are actually seeing loads and loads of people continue to take up smoking, and if people continue smoking, then surely those companies are going to do okay. So by pulling out, you could be putting your investors at risk.
Once again, I do believe that the regulation pressures are going to go up. We've seen this in other examples in other sectors. I honestly believe that this industry, if we look at the long term, has its day counted at some point.
Okay, Chris.
Well, the regulation has gone up enormously over the last 20 years, and the share price has gone up enormously over the last 20 years. It's certainly very conceivable that in the medium to long term, they will start going down and they will keep going down. On the other hand, if they do get into the e-cigarettes and the alternative nicotine products, they may well go up and up and up. There's no way of knowing. But again, I think we're wriggling out of asking the ethical question by saying, actually, this is just a financial it's a financial issue.
This is a investment conference. We're here to manage investment risk, right? But that is our job, is to make money for members, and to make money for members, you have to manage the risks.
No, I fully understand that.
And this is there is a clear risk around tobacco, and there's clear risks around, in our view, carbon. So these are things that we need to take head on, and I think you're slightly, ducking the question, saying, "Oh, well, it's ethical." This is about an investment risk. That's my job.
Sure, yeah.
Right?
I understand why people would be interested now, and it's worth discussing. But the whole debate has been framed around ethics, and it's not just tobacco; it's fossil fuels and it's sugar, and processed food and gambling and all these other industries. And if we're saying we're not going to invest in these industries, it might be because some of them have significant risks that need looking at. But that's no different to any other share. There's no reason to pick out these ones specifically. The reason we pick them out is because they're supposed to be unethical, not because they have some unique risk to them, right?
Sorry. I wanted to go back to the fossil fuel ones, because I think it is a totally different case, and yet something to really, really look at in detail. Because if you look, what we know today is that roughly around 1/3 of all known reserves will not see the daylight, yeah? That we know for sure. And we know that 200, publicly traded companies that hold the most of their reserves, that represents 156% of the carbon budget. So in other words, they are overrated, and at some point, their valuation is going to go down. Now, our role as investors is not to say, oh, I'm just going to divest from all of it. No, it's to identify which of those companies whose reserves are going to see the daylight and which ones they are not. And what we do know is that coal is quite likely to be the most heated because it's the biggest polluter, and because of the new regulation, the UK being a case in point, because coal power plants are going to be banned, I think they're going to by 2025. But secondly, the most inefficient parts of oil and gas, such as tar sands. So it is actually quite sound, policy approach like we've taken to say, I'm not going to invest on tar sands because they are, from a CO2 and cost-efficient point of view, they are the most likely, to have the valuation, to have their valuations go down. And this is what I mean is case by case. You need to really look at what is the risk of the different stocks and different issues.
Why not engage with those companies, though? We've seen some coal companies shift to different forms of energy. So if you engage with those companies rather than sell out or divest, you could have a bigger impact.
Excellent point. And
so we haven't, for example, divested utilities, but we are overweighting those with bigger renewable content, and then we'll engage with and underweight ones with bigger fossil fuel and high carbon emissions, and engage with those companies, say, look, we're going to be investing for the long term, we've got lots of money coming in. If you want to have us as a bigger shareholder, then you need to improve your practices and change your portfolio as to how you generate electricity. So you can engage with companies and influence their behavior, and we're starting to see that in the US, for example, BlackRock and guns, which you might well come to.
Yes. Just one once. I mean, I was just trying to make the point on when, as a last resort, you might decide to divest, but it's more about picking the winners and losers. And part of that choice is definitely comes from the engagement with the companies. There's loads of examples around diversify mining companies such as BHP Billiton that have a strategy of 2 degrees and have decided to really, lower their exposure to coal. So, and that has come after, long-term engagement with investors. We're part of the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change, which we just launched an initiative. It's called the Global Climate 100 Plus Initiative. And this, brings together investors from Melbourne all the way to California. And we are all looking at the same grid, and we are engaging with the 100 plus biggest polluters in the world, asking them, what is the strategy, what are the targets, and how they're going to align to the 2 degrees world.
Okay.
I think also, if I might just, the difference between fossil fuels and alcohol and sugar is you can engage. With tobacco, there is nothing left to engage on. What you're asking is to cease the primary business. So when it comes to trying to look across whether or not it's valid to invest, and I think a lot of investors will also have programs of engagement, and I think that's entirely appropriate, but to engage with tobacco companies and think that that is going to change, that's almost trying to find the way to remain invested behind the excuse of engagement, when the point of engagement with tobacco would be to stop the production of tobacco. And that's the key difference. That's why when you look at quote-unquote sin stocks, tobacco is different.
Okay, but if you pull out tobacco or any other stock, there will be another investor who goes and picks it up. So can you actually make that much of a difference? Like there are enough investors out there.
I think it comes back to that SDG 17, which is partnerships. Nothing in the investment world happens just because of one thing. It's a multitude of events and a multitude of activities coming together that enable and create change. So governments increasing their regulation of the product, the health sector increasing the awareness. I mean, we've been trying to do that for years, it has to be said, but there is an increasing awareness. And then the finance sector coming together with those two instead of working against, and raising the awareness of this industry as one that isn't delivering additional returns from what I've seen from Mark's slides, and is actually not benefiting the global output that we want. I mean, if you look at 14 of the 17 SDGs being negatively impacted, if we're trying to enable those and to get to a point whereby they're being realized, surely we start with one product and say, if we stop investing in that, we enhance the achievement of 14 of those 17. That has to be, it's a combination. There is no one thing that is going to make, there's no one entity making that decision that is going to cause a sea change, but it will, enable a greater change over time. If this was easy, it would have been done by now.
Okay. So I guess one of the hot topics at the moment, Mark, you alluded to it, is guns. Particularly after the shooting last month in Florida. And the cluster munitions, as you've pointed out, Mark, have been controversial for several years, but it is now kind of filtered down to regular gun stocks, so just your average guns because of this. And we've seen BlackRock and State Street and various other asset managers say that they're now starting to engage with gun makers in the US and trying to influence how they deal with this issue. Do you think regular guns now are a sin stock? And are we going to see more scrutiny of them? Mark, we'll start with you maybe.
Well, we're certainly seeing more scrutiny, aren't we? So, I mean, it's interesting that BlackRock, that had been criticised for its lack of engagement on ESG issues, has made efforts in recent years to improve itself, and it's hired a lot of people working on ESG issues, and this appears to be a manifestation of investment. This is the first big issue that they've really taken to task, and I guess guns are probably as much a reputational thing as necessarily there may be regulatory risk down the track, and that's what they're concerned about. it's hard to see it happening in the US, but there does appear to be a slight change in direction in terms of policy. So it's good that the world's largest investor is, starting to take this sort of thing seriously and ESG risk seriously, and we need to think about those. Everyone in this room needs to think about managing ESG risk.
Chris, what's your view?
Well, same as it is with the other ones. BlackRock might get some good publicity out of it for a day, but it's not going to make any difference to the number of guns sold or how people use them. So it's another empty gesture.
So regulations are beginning to change in the US. So, age of being able to buy guns in Florida, I think, is being changed from 18 to 21. And I can't remember that bit of thing that turns a semi-automatic into a machine gun is also changing in Florida, and that may sweep across America. So that will have an impact on gun sales, you would have thought.
Oh, that will, sure, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
if
your argument is that BlackRock are responding to the fact that they think there's going to be regulation in guns and the share price is going to go down, then that's quite right. If people are thinking the other way around, that BlackRock selling their shares is going to somehow lead to more gun regulation, I think that would be a mistake. But yeah, once again, if we were assuming the price is going to go down, yes, you should probably sell anyway.
Yes, I wanted to mention, actually, there's been a parallel, sort of parallel, some years ago. Before 2011, there was arms were the only sector that they were not regulated internationally. They were not under the WTO rules, they were not included. And that was after years and years of campaigning from NGOs like Amnesty International and Oxfam. Finally, an UN treaty was signed, when Obama came to power. And on that treaty, it actually regulates conventional weapons and munitions, but only on cross-bordering, trade. Now, there are some really, really good clauses, and articles in that treaty that they are not applied, nationally, only on the cross-border, but maybe there could be, a point in reference for future regulation in the US. And I agree with what Mark said. I think that there is a real question mark about what is the role of the industry in terms of more, selling more responsibly, the arms. And I think that at some point there are going to be some regulations. So I do think there is a case to engage with companies, as we did at the time when the UN treaty was being negotiated. We did engage with companies, and some of the most famous defense companies actually really supported and advocated for the treaty. So maybe, there's an example of how it can work.
I guess some of the noisiest people about gun makers at the moment, BlackRock, State Street, for example, are big passive managers. They're holding the majority of their shares passively. Very little is through their active funds. So they don't have the option to sell out of those. And investors in their indexes are just going to have to put up with those stocks anyway, even if they think that share price is going to fall. So do you think that changes the dynamics? If you're an active investor, you can always threaten to divest. If you're a passive, you sit there and you watch that share price fall.
So we're a big passive investor, majority. So all our equity portfolios are either market cap weighted or smart beta, right? And the smart beta allows you to weight your portfolio differently. So that's what we've done in carbon, for example. But I think as a long-term investor with passive, so we can't sell, it means we've actually got to engage more actively. We've got to vote our shares more actively. We've got to take our responsibility as a shareholder more seriously, because we can't sell out. An active manager can just divest anything, right? So it's really important that we engage on what we think are the key issues, and we decide, majority of it is going to be engagement. There will be potentially some divestment, as we've done in coal and cluster munitions. And I just would add, actually, so we wrote all the cluster munitions manufacturers that we sold, we wrote to them all, and we actually got a letter back from Singapore Technologies and said, I'm sure it wasn't our influence, but they said, we've stopped making the parts that are exclusive to cluster munitions and landmines. So maybe engagement, we're not the only ones who've done that, so maybe engagement actually does impact behavior of companies, and they've got reputational risks to manage as well. But to Rachel's point, that's probably not going to work in tobacco.
Well, I guess we'll go to Q&A in 2 minutes, so if you have any questions, do send them in via the app. But very quickly, do you think there's a difference between how younger people, millennials, and older people are viewing sin stocks? Helena, maybe we'll start with you.
Clearly, I think that is just a question. New generations not only have different values. How many, 40 years ago, how many of us recycle, and everyone today, recycles, and obviously that has an impact on how they see the world. But it is on the values, but also on their approach. One thing I can say, and another thing I can say, is that when we think about millennials, we need to think about millennials globally, because one thing we have already experienced is that the younger herds of big fortunes in Asia, for instance, they are so interested in impact investing. We're getting so many demands for impact investing and green thematic funds. So yes, I think yes.
Okay, we've had loads and loads of questions, so I'm going to go through them really quickly. Mark, we'll start with you and say, what level of engagement with gun manufacturers do you expect from your index asset managers?
I guess quite a lot, but they need to. We work with our asset manager to prioritise the things that we think are most important, and we can't engage on everything, and so I suspect there will be some engagement on guns. But the issues that we worry about on a daily basis, executive pay is one, inequality of pay across companies is an area we're focused. Basically, and carbon is another area where we do a lot of engagement. So we haven't discussed guns to date, but that may well come in.
Okay. Rachel, this might be a good one for you. This question says, in the developing countries, tobacco is the only source of income for many communities. And so will they not suffer if we stop investing in tobacco?
Well, interestingly, when ABP announced that they were moving out of tobacco, and they had a statement as part of their framework, which was that there was no detriment from doing so. And I spoke to them about the underlying research and so on, and they had looked across all areas. So this was no financial detriment, but no social detriment either. So the farmers were not going to be worse off. And I think the issue that they have also looked at more broadly is that when a farmer is a tobacco farmer, you'll also find that a lot of them are in debt to the tobacco companies, because the cycle of tobacco farming is such that they need to purchase up front the plants, pesticides and so on, and then that crop is purchased at the end of the season at a price that's determined at the end of the season. And in a number of instances, those farmers actually end up on indebted on an annual basis, and that isn't of benefit. And there are also projects investigating alternative crops, including food crops, because there is food poverty in a lot of the areas that grow tobacco. And when those crops are replaced with food crops, the food crops actually generate more income and benefit those farmers to a greater extent.
Okay, this is an interesting view, I think. It says all stocks have risks associated with them. Why do the panelists maintain that the market is incapable of pricing in the risk for potentially unethical stocks? Helena, what's your view on that?
Get the easy question. I think we are struggling to price those risks because we, traditional analysis has not taken into consideration. But I do think that we're making huge progress, and there's lots of efforts that they are drawn into that. So, for instance, integrating the price of carbon and expected price of carbon, it's a really good way of starting to see what potential, risk or what will be the impact on carbon intensive sectors. It is true that it's not clear cut for all the issues, particularly around, such as tobacco, but this is why you need to conduct ESG analysis on one hand, and then integrate it, take it into account when you look at, more holistically at your fundamental research.
Okay. This one attendee says, sin stocks are redefined over time. If I'm investing for the long term, how do I know that the ethical stock of today won't become a sin stock of tomorrow? And will Facebook, for example, become a sin stock because it enables dissemination of terrorist propaganda? Mark? It's actually, there's several questions along these lines. It's the same with Google and tax evasion.
You're absolutely right. So, you know, in 1900, tobacco stocks were not sin stocks. Okay? Science progresses. So we have an ethical fund, and that ethical fund has an ethical committee that oversees it and reviews its ethical policies, annually, and that will definitely evolve. So what we're talking about, I mean, you can call these things sin stocks. What we're concerned about is the risks of investing in companies, and for the majority of our members, we're not making an ethical decision. We're making an investment decision.
Okay. Unfortunately, I think we've run out of time to ask any more questions, but thank you very much for sending them all in. If you could, please do rate the panel on the conference app, and also stay around for the next session, which is on the end of QE and what impact that will have on the pension industry. And thank you guys for joining me.
Thank you.